I'm Dr. Michael Ann DeVito, and I'd like to introduce you to two real people who are trying their best to present their identity on social platforms. Meet participant 15. He's very authentic in terms of how he presents himself on social platforms. He likes to put it all out there, warts and all. And that includes his sexual orientation, he's gay, and related content. Now, participant 15 uses multiple platforms, but let's talk about Facebook for a minute. Participant 15 was on Facebook in the first place, with the goals of sharing interests with other queer people and educating on queer issues. And it was great at first, until participant 15 noticed that, over time, things seemed to be changing. He saw his feed get more and more curated, and his content get less and less visibility. Participant 15 tried to adapt, recognize trends, so he could still accomplish his goals on the platform, but ultimately he's an authentic presenter. He's not going to pretend to be something he's not to boost his own content distribution. Participant 15 can't leave Facebook. His network there is too important, but he really wants to, because it changed over time into a platform Participant 15 isn't comfortable with, and on which Participant 15 can't figure out how to self-present in a way that's acceptable to him. Participant 15 is left strictly limiting his activity on a platform he once loved, but now kinda hates. The second person I want you to meet is Participant 21. Now, Participant 21 uses a lot of platforms, including Facebook, where their main goal is to maintain deep, very open ties, largely with other queer people. It's Participant 21's most social platform and a site of much identity disclosure. And Facebook was great for that, until Participant 21 noticed, through observation and hearing news reports, that the way Facebook algorithmically curated content was changing to prioritize most interacted with friends, a direct threat to Participant 21's ability to determine their own audience. Now, Participant 21 was not happy about this. When Facebook said it was going to choose for me who out of my friends were worthy to be seen on my timeline, I tried to use that against it. Participant 21's being literal here. They didn't leave the platform, they didn't even limit their posting. Instead, they started searching all of their friends' names and going and liking old posts across the board, posts by people they almost never interacted with, trying to send some sort of signal to the platform to counteract this algorithmic threat. The platform changed. It changed in a way that was specifically detrimental to Participant 21, and they adapted. Participants 15 and 21 both came up against the same set of self-presentation-related problems. See, self-presentation is essentially an interaction between the projection of a desired identity by the self and the responses of others or the audience to that projection. But algorithms change the game. Suddenly, we're not the ones determining our audience. The feed algorithm is. And we're not directly observing feedback. The feed algorithm mediates that too now. Algorithmic feeds put a wedge in the whole self-presentation process by taking control of content distribution and therefore audience composition, and they do not make it easy to predict who's going to wind up in that audience. But we adapt, via folk theorization, the formation of intuitive, informal theories that individuals develop to explain the outcomes, effects, or consequences of technological systems. In the specific context of social platform self-presentation, we adapt by employing our own folk theories of how algorithmic feeds distribute content in order to inform our self-presentation decision-making. Essentially, we use folk theories as a sort of translation layer between us and a hard-to-decipher algorithmic feed. But while we know how folk theories are initially formed and that they can be changed, we didn't know how or if they're adapted over time in response to a changing platform environment in the context of everyday, non-influencer, non-professional users, who are the majority of users, until I looked into it. I took a constructivist-grounded theory approach here, using an asynchronous remote community, or ARC, where you use a secret group on a platform as a participant hub for research activities and discussion. Here, a secret Facebook group. And you invite a sample. Here, 25 non-expert, non-professional, non-influencer social platform users, who are all queer. See, self-presentation is a heightened concern for queer people, so we're more likely to be able to elicit information. Plus, that lets me center the work around a marginalized group, so any resulting solutions take that group's needs into account. In this ARC, participants engaged in 7 research activities, 1 per week. After the weekly prompts, I finished up data collection with individual exit interviews, which ultimately leads us back to the findings, and our friends participants 15 and 21 attempting to adapt in this rapidly changing platform environment. Even though they face similar problems, participants 15 and 21 had very different outcomes. Participant 15 is begrudgingly using a platform he hates in an extremely limited way, while accomplishing very few of his goals, while Participant 21 is tricking the platform into doing exactly what they need it to do and going about their business, accomplishing their goals along the way. Frustration, disappointment, resentment, and a lack of options versus clever adaptation and positive, if somewhat wary, continuance. So what's the difference? Well, let's look at how they're theorizing. Specifically, let's look at their theorization complexity level. Participant 15 works at a functional level of folk theorization complexity. He knows that some part of the platform impacts what one sees on a feed, but he couldn't tell you how it works or what factors might influence it. Basically, he knows there's an effect, and some part of the platform is a cause, but no more, and it shows in his behavior. He's not adapting very much at all. He knows things are changing, he knows it frustrates him, but he doesn't have a folk theory that gives him options, just guidance on who to blame when things don't work, the platform. End result? Frustration, limiting use, and unaccomplished goals. Participant 21's experience is very different. They work at a structural level of folk theorization complexity. They know there's a computational mechanism, which they actually name as an algorithm, that impacts content distribution by weighting multiple criteria. Now, they don't know the weightings. They have no sense of causal ordering. They don't even know which criteria is real. This is no expert understanding, far from it. But they do know there's a mechanism and what it ultimately does, and they know there's different pieces of criteria they could try to manipulate to influence that mechanism. And again, theorization complexity is reflected in behavior. Participant 21's adapting their behavior directly to the algorithm, taking advantage of the many options and paths forward their folk theory presents. In fact, they're outright fighting the system, and as far as they're concerned, they're winning. Their end result? Continued use and accomplished goals. Participants 15 and 21 illustrate an important divide in folk theorization complexity. When it comes to noticing change, functional theorizers don't recognize algorithmic change explicitly, but structural theorizers do. When deciding how they're going to adapt, these two groups also essentially have different choices available to them. At a functional level, you can accept the change, limit your participation, or just leave. At a structural level, there's also the option of essentially resisting, like Participant 21 did. I also saw differences when foraging for the information folk theories are built from, when folks are trying to figure out what happened and what to do about it. Information foraging for functional theorists is limited. Watch and wait approaches are popular, as is simple testing behavior or asking a friend. For structural theorists, it's far more robust. We see big expansions of existing information sources, more observation of the platform, and what's best characterized as experimentation. Finally, we see differences in actual adaptation behavior. Just like Participant 15, functional theorists make small adjustments to existing self-presentation tactics. They're responding to individual incidents, not directly considering and adapting to the algorithms, but rather slightly tweaking their existing way of doing things to try and adjust around changes. Importantly, even these small adjustments fail sometimes, leading to severe limiting of participation or just platform abandonment. In contrast, the experience of structural theorists is more like Participant 21's. Structural theorists are making big adaptations. They're responding directly to algorithmic change, they know that, and they think strategically based on it. The end result's different. Adaptations that substantially reprioritize or change existing tactics tend to work, and sometimes even succeed in overcoming whatever change the system is imposing. So what does this mean for algorithmic literacy? To accomplish our self-presentation-related goals on social platforms, participants 15, 21, and all the rest of us now have to make rational judgments about how to deal with algorithmic curation. To make those rational judgments, users must not only theorize about and adapt to an opaque system, but do so repeatedly, under unpredictable circumstances, without any guarantee of institutional guidance or assistance. That means they need not just a set of static skills or guidelines, but rather the extensible ability to critically evaluate, theorize, and strategically adapt to whatever circumstances they encounter on the platform. An algorithmic literacy, which I define as the capacity and opportunity to be aware of both the presence and impact of algorithmically driven systems on self- or collaboratively identified goals, and the capacity and opportunity to crystallize this understanding into a strategic use of these systems to accomplish said goals. To truly act strategically in a constantly changing environment, users must strategically adapt. To do this, users must be responsive to the causes of the effects of algorithmic platform mechanisms, not simply the effects themselves. And to understand causes in an algorithmically driven environment, you need to be aware of mechanistic fragments. Here, the algorithm's inputs, the building blocks of causes. Participant 21's structural folk theorization hit this standard. They had many possible causes to work with, their mechanistic fragments, and they could happily adapt. Participant 15's functional folk theorization didn't hit this standard. Their functional understanding only provides information about effects, and they're not accomplishing their goals at all. I propose that our standard for algorithmic literacy should be structural folk theorization, because it gives the individual all the tools they need to think strategically, to theorize about and react to causes, and to adapt their behavior directly to the algorithmic system itself. Theorizing at a structural level gives the user far more freedom to experiment and expand their own knowledge, to adapt if they can and even resist if they need to. Structural theorization essentially gives the user agency, the agency to pursue their own goals, the very heart of any modern literacy.